Hi everybody, happy Tuesday. So today I want to talk about what you can do, or more specifically what you need to be aware of if you have ongoing homework battles, schoolwork battles, a kid who doesn't want to go to school in the morning, all of that type of stuff, a kid who's calling home, constantly saying they're sick, not feeling well. Maybe you're homeschooling and it's an uphill battle. Whether this was something you started before, or whether you were doing this before COVID, or you've noticed this since you started homeschooling since COVID. And so it's just understanding what's really going on, that it's so much more than a reading disorder, dyslexia, a learning disability, and so forth, and what you can kind of do to start paving the way to address this. So what a lot of people are not aware of is that a lot of kids who have, learning difficulties, dyslexia, reading disorders, whatever you want to call them, have reading anxiety. And it might sound kind of like a little catchphrase and kind of, silly, but it's really, really legitimate. And I even will go as far as saying that for some kids, particularly as they get older, they develop something that's very similar to like a reading PTSD. So I'm not going to go into PTSD in a lot of detail, but a lot of us think PTSD, we always think of the worst case scenario, like the soldier who's come back from war, someone who's a victim of sexual assault, where it's like what we say level 10 PTSD. But these kids, some of them, have so much anxiety around schoolwork, homework, or reading, or all of the above, that it literally sends their primal brain into having a fight or flight response. And it's really hard for even them to control, because reading and school and learning has actually become traumatic. And I wanted to address this because I have parents telling me that their child is actually thriving since COVID, because they opted to do homeschooling, or maybe even the online learning is going better than they expected it to go. And for some it's not, but for many I was surprised to hear that homeschooling has been like a game changer for their kid. Is their kid reading perfectly? No. But the level of anxiety, the behavior, and even the willingness has improved. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit in a minute. But if your child has, exhibiting a lot of anxiety when it's time to read or do schoolwork, you can probably assume they have, kind of this reading anxiety, reading trauma, if you will. And remember that in kids, it doesn't look the same as it does in adults. Maybe they're having panic attacks. Maybe they're, in tears, or getting really angry when it's time to read or do schoolwork, or maybe it's looking like behavior issues. Maybe it's looking like they're making excuses. Maybe it's looking like they're being defiant. And you have to keep in mind that the primal brain doesn't think in abstractions. It doesn't have tones of gray or shades of gray. It's black or it's white, safe or unsafe. There's your parasympathetic nervous system, which is, rest and digest. And there's your sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. So it's either here or it's there. And if your child starts to associate, because of their negative experiences with reading, if they start to associate reading with something that's really traumatic, that's injuring their self-worth, that's affecting their self-esteem, where they always feel stupid, maybe they're made fun of, maybe because they're asked to read in class, or maybe they're not asked to read in class, maybe because they see everyone else is able to do the work and they can't. This, to their primal brain, is a threat. The brain doesn't interpret safety as, saber-toothed tiger and I can't read. It's either like a threat because it's causing me anxiety, or it's safe because it's making me feel peaceful and safe and relaxed. And that is how the primal brain works. And so what happens is, for a lot of these kids, they really go into a fight or flight. They really resist the reading, the schoolwork, all of that, in or out of school, because every time they sit down to do the reading or the schoolwork, it just confirms to them that they are stupid. Right? We know they're not, but in their mind, to them, it confirms that there's something wrong with them, that they're not like everyone else, that they're broken, they're worthless, all of these horrible associations, and they just want to shut down. And when it gets to this kind of reading PTSD, if you will, it literally starts to become an automatic reaction. I can relate. I'm like that with spiders. It doesn't matter how hard I try to control it. I even see a really, good picture in a book that someone has done an amazing job of taking a spider, and the book is like across the room, and I don't even know what's happened. It's just like 0 to 360 in 2 seconds. And that is what's happened with these kids, some of these kids who have reading anxiety, reading trauma, PTSD, whatever you want to call it. Let me know if this sounds like, maybe it sounds like a child, maybe it sounds like your child. Maybe you can relate because you've had experiences. I know I can relate. I had math anxiety for sure. That's why I won't even do math with my daughter, because it's still there to some extent. And I want that to be a positive experience for her. And if I start getting frustrated, then I kind of go into that old self, and I just don't want to have to deal with that and have put that on her. So the thing is with these kids is that it doesn't always start like this. So I talk to a lot of parents of younger children who are 6, 7, 8, maybe 9, and they will say, no, he's still willing, or she's still happy to do the work, or they put in lots of extra time. They're really trying hard. They're motivated. They're really determined to do well in school. And it's so wonderful to hear that. And I really always am hoping that motivation continues. But unfortunately, what I often see is that these kids end up going through tutoring and remedial reading, and they have IEPs, and they're being pulled out of class, and they're doing the extra work, and it's making very little difference. They're making progress at a snail's pace, and it's just making them feel so worthless and like they're broken, because they're seeing their peers moving so far along and they are not. And that's just reconfirming their false belief that they are stupid and broken and not good enough and all of that type of stuff. And, let me know if this resonates, whether your kid is still in that stage where they're super motivated, and hopefully they still are, or has your child gone into that mode. I've talked to moms regularly, like several times a week, who tell me their 13, 14, 15-year-old, wants to drop out. They won't go to school, all that type of stuff, because they have this reading trauma and so forth. And so that's exactly what happened with several weeks ago. I was talking to a mom. Her 14-year-old son said, as soon as I can, I'm dropping out. And the mom was horrified. She had no idea that this was his intention, because he had been through so much with the system and he was making so little progress. And so it's no wonder that, I always say, can you blame him? Because if I had been working at, I don't know, a sport or some kind of hobby, a musical instrument for those many years, and I was making very little progress, I would kind of just want to quit too. I would be like, I'm not cut out for this. So you have to keep in mind that what happens with these kids is when they are reading, if they can't read well, it's just confirming to them that they're a failure. And let me kind of go through the signs actually of what it looks like, so that maybe you can get an idea that maybe it's not a behavior, maybe your kid's not giving you a hard time on purpose, that it's almost getting to a point where it's perhaps something they can't control. So one of the big markers is that they procrastinate to do schoolwork, homework, whatever the case may be, whether they're in school or being homeschooled, and will make, excuses of why they can't do it yet. Maybe they said they left it at home. Maybe they tell the teacher, maybe they say left it at school, or maybe they're telling the teacher, I left it at home. There's all kinds of reasons of why they can't do the work. Maybe they will act out, whether it's just totally start and go on another track with behavior to kind of derail the situation to avoid the work. We see this a lot with kids who can't read in class. This became really apparent to me when I was teaching grade 7 and 8. Most of my really serious behavior issues in class were because the kids could not read. They hated school. They knew they couldn't do the work. And they just kind of get into that habitual pattern of how to address this and so forth. And so sometimes what they will do too is purposely make mistakes or not try. And I'm not saying, there's a lot of kids who are unfortunately accused of not trying when they are trying. So I want to make that distinction. But sometimes they will purposely make mistakes or really not try their best. And it's self-preservation. The reason they're doing that is by kind of not trying their best, then they know they didn't try, and they don't have to deal with those feelings of failure, because those feelings of failure is just so, it's just so devastating for them. And imagine having to face that feeling of failure every single day for a large part of the day. And I think that a lot of us who reading comes easily for, if it comes easily for you, we don't really get how detrimental it is whenever you have to face failure every single day. And I think we've all been in situations where we feel like a total failure. Maybe it's personal, maybe it's in your marriage, maybe it's in your, as a parent, maybe it's at work, whatever the case may be. And now imagine that you had to deal with that continuously throughout the day in, day out, year after year, and everyone is trying to help you and say, try this, try that, and you're still making progress at a snail's pace. And then we wonder why these kids end up even with mental health issues, or, in these, all these other situations with behavior issues and all of that type of stuff. So other things they'll do is argue to avoid reading. Sometimes it might be full on, like you can tell they have anxiety. I once had a guy in my office. He was probably in his 20s. He had severe dyslexia. He had been through the ringer in terms of trying every program and so forth. His parents tried everything they could. And I could see the anxiety rising when I asked him to read a bit for me. And I told him, like, I know it's really severe and maybe you can only read 5 words. But he sat down and then he immediately got up, and I could tell he was like trying to calm himself down. He said, I've got to go to the bathroom. And I said, that's okay. And I knew he didn't have to go to the bathroom. I knew he was literally having a fight or flight reaction, and he was going into flight mode. He had to get out of the situation. And I'm sure he tried to talk himself through a bit in the bathroom. He came back, he paced a bit. There was a lot of anxiety just to read a little tiny bit of information. So keep that in mind, that this is extremely stressful for kids. And that is why also I really am, we have to be careful of like who the child is reading with. Hopefully the more patient parent, that we're in our kind of best self, that we're really aware of what these kids are dealing with, because every criticism, comment, so forth is just gonna really make things worse if we are not careful. And then obviously I've mentioned stuff like they begin to hate school. They might even start to avoid social events because it requires reading as they get older. Like, one mom said, my daughter is invited out regularly to go to certain events and her reading is so bad. There was some restaurant that they wanted to go to, but she can't read, more than 5 words. And she didn't want the other kids to know that. And so she just didn't go, because she was concerned she wouldn't be able to read the menu because it was some kind of slightly foreign food or whatever. So again, as they get older, they might avoid social situations. They might, and that's where the self-esteem comes in too. Like, they know they're limited, but then they limit themselves even more, because I often find people always think they're worse than they are at reading. I'm always like, no, this is better than you let on, right? As they get older. And so you want to be aware that these are the kids where if it doesn't get addressed, they might limit themselves in terms of what college they go to, what career they choose, all of that type of stuff. So also, that whole reading anxiety and even learned helplessness, and obviously just a part of low self-esteem is being hypersensitive to feeling stupid. They might think that someone is making them feel stupid or calling them stupid when that's not the intention at all, but they're just so hypersensitive that everybody thinks I'm stupid that they might even be reactive in situations like that. And sometimes these kids might, even with the self-esteem, right, and we see this too, show off more in areas that they really do excel at, because they feel like that's all they have, right? That's where so much of their worth comes from. So let me know, do you see this? Let me know in the comments below, whether you're watching the live or the replay. Do you see this reading anxiety, reading trauma, PTSD, whatever you want to call it, with your child? What have you done to help address it? What do you find works? So my number one tip is you need to address it as soon as possible. If you see it happening in your child's 10, don't wait till they're 12. It's not going to go away on its own. Do avoid force. Like, nothing is worse than think of the thing that causes you the most anxiety and someone is forcing you to do it. So you might be thinking, well, I need him to do his reading. So I agreed, reading is survival in this day and age. But I would honestly look into a new approach, because if the reading has been going on for years, the tutoring, all of that stuff, and it's producing few results, then you need to ask yourself if it's worth it, and at what cost, because it sometimes I find can make things worse. And I again want to be caution, I'm not against tutoring. I see kids, they do really well in tutoring. Sometimes they just need that extra support. But I see kids with learning disabilities and the tutoring has just made things worse. Nothing to do with the tutor, but the lower brain levels are not developed. And I've mentioned before studies that have come out. A new one more recently found that all of the kids in the study group had retained primitive reflexes. So has to do with brain organization. Once they started working on that and doing brain training exercises and so forth, these kids made phenomenal changes. So addressing those reflexes, addressing weak connections in the brain, areas of underdevelopment. If, typically with dyslexics, for example, the right brain is overdeveloped and the left brain is underdeveloped. That's where the language center is, in the left brain. So you want to work on those things first. And I'm even going to say, if it's possible, I've seen kids where I work with parents all over the world, and I've talked to so many parents who say, it got so bad we actually pulled them out of school and we did our own thing. And sometimes a few months of unschooling where you're not letting them sit at home on iPads or TVs or gaming or anything like that, but pulling them out to, if that's possible, I know that's not possible for everyone, to engage in their own interests, to realize that they actually love learning. It's a natural human instinct to want to learn and acquire information and create and build and, all that type of stuff. But if it's always wrapped in this context of reading and the school system, which can be so injurious to so many of these kids, then that's where the trauma sets in. And if we can build that confidence up, build that self-esteem up, help reduce that anxiety, which, as I've mentioned, has happened to so many of of the clients I work with since COVID, that can sometimes help to turn things around. But ultimately, you really want to work on developing those lower brain levels, strengthening those weak connections, because that is what's going to be the game changer. And again, nothing against therapists. If I've seen a lot of kids do really well with therapists, but if your child has reading anxiety, taking them to a counselor or therapist to talk about that might be something you want to do after you address the brain organization and so forth, because reading anxiety, or a therapist can only do so much. If the problem is still there and the situation is still there, the anxiety is most likely still going to be there. So let me know in the comments below if this resonates. Does this sound like your child? What have you tried? What works? What doesn't work? And do you know that your child has poor brain organization, weak connections, that there's some glitches and so forth? And if you haven't grabbed my free starter kit, the Laser Focused Learner, which has some food tips and exercises to start improving brain function and organization, do grab that. I will post that I'll post the link in the comments below. Thanks for watching.